So what we are going to be looking at today is 2 Chronicles, primarily chapter 20, and making the love and the power of God our strength. So we'll start off with the thought that at some point in our lives, we're going to face challenges or enemies, or both, greater than ourselves. Has anybody had that experience yet? Because if you're not raising your hand, somewhere during your life, you're going to be raising your hand. That's just something that the Lord does with us. And it's a part of life. But we're going to be looking at chapter 20 when this is a reality for Jehoshaphat. King Jehoshaphat. So one of the things that, there's many examples in the scriptures, many examples, hundreds of examples of those in the scriptures who faced challenges that were greater than themselves, greater than their resources, greater than their strength, greater than their know-how. And here we have, I'll just list a few examples here. Abraham and Sarah, they couldn't have children during the time when it was humanly possible, right? They got into old age. Sarah was beyond childbearing years. Abraham himself was very old as well. And they had children. God gave them a child miraculously. And why was that important? Because God promised it. Joseph, great-grandson Joseph, he was a slave in Egypt, sold into slavery by his own brothers. And he was a prisoner in Egypt. He had no power to deliver himself from his situation, absolutely none whatsoever. But he continued trusting in the Lord. And what happened? He was freed from prison. He became the vizier of Egypt, second in command only to Pharaoh. Miraculous. Moses, think of Moses, who was leading 3 million people. And many of them rebellious against him during the entire 40 years. And at one point, in fact, it was in this parashah, or last week's parashah, I should say, in the book of Numbers, he said, Lord, if this is your plan for me, just kill me. I mean, literally, he said that to the Lord. Just take me out now. I'm not equipped for this. I can't handle this. And the Lord, it was beyond his strength. So the Lord provided for him. He provided, he filled 70 men, 70 elders of Israel with the same spirit that Moshe was filled with. And they helped him in judging and leading the people of Israel. So God intervenes when it's beyond our strength. David as a teenager, we all know, he faced Goliath. That was not something that humanly he should have had the victory in. And even in the Brit Hadashah, I think of Peter. Peter gets a bad rap, by the way. Peter was a great man and faithful to the Lord. But you'll remember when Yeshua was walking on the water, Peter asked Yeshua, can I come out? Yeshua said, yes, by all means, come out. And Peter looks at all of the waves around him as he starts to walk on the water, and then he just starts to sink out of fear. Well, he was the only one of the disciples who got out of the boat, by the way. So, thank God, for Peter and his willingness to try. But it was also Peter who he dangerously, when Yeshua was being tried the night before he was crucified, he dangerously tried to stay close to Yeshua to support him and to do whatever he could. Well, he ended up denying Yeshua at that point. So where is the strength from the Lord? The strength from the Lord came at that Shavuot, the Shavuot that followed 50 days later. God filled him, filled the Talmidim, the disciples of Yeshua, filled them with the Spirit. And they were filled with boldness. There was no more fear. That's a big part of what God wants to do in our lives as well. In fact, in our reading today, he's going to say several times, don't fear, don't be afraid. And Israel and the southern tribe of Judah, and Jehoshaphat, they're going to be asked to do something rather frightening, but God does deliver them. So our text, we're going to start back in 2 Chronicles 18, because we want to get a picture of Jehoshaphat, just who he was, and the greatness of this king. He was one of the great kings of Judah, the southern tribes of Judah. You remember at that time, Israel was divided. The southern tribes, which was primarily Judah and Benjamin and some of the Levites, and then there were the northern tribes. And most of the kings of the northern tribes they did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and many of the kings in the south were faithful to the Lord. Some were not. But here we have King Jehoshaphat, one of the good kings, and he was faced with the situation here and this is going to be in chapter 20. He's faced by 3 armies that come to destroy the southern tribes at Jerusalem. And in human terms, he had no chance against those armies. Actually, any one of those armies that came against them would be a formidable foe. But 3 of them together, Judah had absolutely no chance. Jehoshaphat was facing something way beyond their strength. So, I find it fascinating. I was thinking about this. I have known many people who have gone through AA or some similar program. And it's interesting that the first step in AA is admit one is powerless over alcohol. So admit one is powerless on their own. That our own lives have become unmanageable if we're enslaved, to that particular addiction. And then the second step, which is just as important, recognize that the power of God, and this is a little bit paraphrased from how AA would say it, but that the power of God is greater than our own strength. God is able to deliver us from anything that we'll be facing. That's exactly the place that Jehoshaphat had to come to as well, and the place that we all need to come to when we're facing those situations beyond our power. And so, through the example of King Jehoshaphat, we're going to be challenged this morning to make the love and the power of God our strength. How do we do that? First of all, that example of Jehoshaphat, he trusted in the power and the love of God and praised God even before he was delivered. His actions continually reflected his faith and his humility. And when we follow his example, we too can overcome any obstacles or challenges that we face in our lives. Now, you'll hear me saying Jehoshaphat, not Jehoshaphat. I like to pronounce names as much as possible with the Hebrew pronunciation. So there you have it for the many Hebrew students that we have in the room here today. Jehoshaphat, one of the very good kings of the southern tribes of Judah. So we're going to get a brief look at his life and his character as we look through just some of the highlights of chapters 18 and 19. But the main focus that we're going to have today is chapter 20, where Jehoshaphat's faith is put to the test. So in chapter 18, we see that Jehoshaphat, he makes an alliance with the king of Israel in the north through marriage. And it was his son who married actually a child or a daughter of the king and the queen in the north. They happen to be, you might be familiar with the name Ahab, right? Ahab, we shudder when we hear that name, actually. Well, in the Hebrew, it's Achav. So you might hear me using the Hebrew name there, but Achav, he was married to the infamous Jezebel. Their daughter marries a son of Jehoshaphat. And that doesn't turn out very well for the son. But in chapter 18, Jehoshaphat visits Samaria in the north, and he agrees to go out to battle with Achav against Ramoth Gilead. Adonai had something to say about this. It's interesting that Achav, he had many prophets that he consulted with. Some of them claim to even be followers of Adonai, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But they also were prophets of other false gods. So, and those prophets of Achav, they would say only good for whatever Achav had in mind to do. So he's asking, am I going to be successful when I go out against Ramoth Gilead? And all of the prophets say, yes, you're going to win the battle and you're going to come back victorious. And they're all of one voice. But Jehoshaphat was there when they were prophesying, and Jehoshaphat was not satisfied. And so he asked Achav, is there not any prophet here that is only a prophet of Adonai? And Achav said, well, and by the way, Elijah, he was alive at this time, but and he was Achav considered him a great enemy. But Achav said, well, there is one prophet, Micah, but he really doesn't have anything good to say when I consult him either. But Jehoshaphat convinced him, well, let's bring him in and see what he has to say in the name of Adonai. And so Micah comes in and he says, well, at first he says, you'll be okay. You'll come back okay. And Achav, he suspects that he's not really telling the truth here. He says, speak the truth here before me. And so Micah says, well, if you go out against them, you're not coming back. Despite that, Achav does go out and he dies in battle. But Jehoshaphat returns safely. And this was just one of many times when Jehoshaphat allied himself with the northern king of Israel. So this was one of the stumbling blocks in Jehoshaphat's life. And really, I should say, he probably felt like he could handle it. And it never really affected his faith and his walk with Adonai, but it did have consequences for his children. His children turned against Adonai, especially his firstborn son. So it's just a lesson for us. We talked about good parenting with Doug and Bonnie. Our actions as parents do have positive and negative consequences for our children. And that was something that Jehoshaphat had to learn the hard way. Jehoshaphat was a good and a faithful king, but again, he sought those alliances with northern Israel over and over, including after this great deliverance in chapter 20. Jehoram, he was the firstborn of Jehoshaphat. He married the daughter. He was the one that married the daughter of Achav and Jezebel. And he ended up, when Jehoshaphat had died and Jehoram takes over, Jehoshaphat had put Jehoram as king, but he also assigned his 6 brothers to rule over the cities of Judah as well, many of the cities. And he gave them great wealth and the ability to rule with their brother. Well, Jehoram didn't like that. He murdered all 6 of his brothers. And then he began to walk in the ways of the northern kings. So he turned away from the Lord big time. And this lasted for a couple generations before we see another good king. Chapter 19, Jehoshaphat makes, this really shows his character. He makes judicial reforms and restores faith in Adonai throughout Judah. And this is after he's rebuked by one of the prophets. It just shows his humility. Jehoshaphat had humility. And, we compare that to today, a stark contrast when we see politicians and even religious leaders today. Power corrupts unless we're really walking close with the Lord, unless we're really striving to be faithful to the Lord. Power corrupts. And so, politicians, even religious leaders, as they become powerful, oftentimes they also become arrogant. Anything but humble. Chapter 19 shows us that faithfulness and the faithfulness and the commitment of Jehoshaphat that he had to Adonai. So here's some of the text here. Even though this isn't our main text, it just really gives us a sense of the character of Jehoshaphat. In chapter 19, verse 1, the king Jehoshaphat of Judah returned safely to his palace in Jerusalem. And this is after he went out with Achav. Achav dies. Jehoshaphat returns safely. But then in verse 2, Yehu, son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate Adonai?" Now, just as a side note, one of the objections that the Jewish community has to the teachings of Yeshua is that Yeshua said, you've heard it said that you should hate your enemy and love your neighbor. But I say, love your enemy as well, right? And so, you could, and the Jewish community, they say, well, the Tanakh, it never says, to hate your enemy. It's not like this is something new that Yeshua was saying, but here it in a certain context, to hate, we have to understand the range of meaning of hate within Hebrew, but we're to stand against those who hate Adonai and are doing destructive things. And so Jehoshaphat was being rebuked for aligning himself with somebody who was destructive and did evil in the sight of Adonai. And we'll talk just a little bit later. I'll mention why he probably did this and why he had an inclination to want to have northern Israel as an ally. But in verse 2 here, Yehu comes to Jehoshaphat and he said, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate Adonai? Because of this, wrath from before Adonai is against you. Nevertheless, good things are found in you, for you have removed the Asherah poles out of the land and have set your heart to seek God." In verse 4, Jehoshaphat dwelt in Jerusalem, and he went out again among the people from Beersheba over to the hill country of Ephraim. And this is remarkable. I just love imagining what was going on here in this time. And he brought them back to Adonai, the God of their fathers. So he was going around the countryside of Judah, and he was bringing people back to a faith in Adonai, to trust in him. He also appointed judges in the land throughout all the fortified cities of Judah, city by city. He said to the judges, "Consider what you are doing." And here he's admonishing these judges. He's encouraging them and warning them at the same time. But these teachings are directly from the Torah when it comes to the character of the judges, how the judges should conduct themselves. So here he admonishes them. He said to the judges, "Consider what you are doing, for you are not judge for man, but for Adonai, who is with you when you pass judgment. That's such an important concept, that the judges of Israel, they were actually representing God. Now that sounds like a pretty awesome responsibility, right? You might think twice about being a judge. You might think twice about being a prophet too. They're representing Adonai. That's remarkable. But we see that, by the way, in the Brit Hadashah as well, Matthew 18, where Yeshua says, where 3 or more are gathered. The context there, we tend to apply it to very often to prayer, but that's not really the context. The context is the establishment of judges within the community, including within the community of Yeshua. And so Yeshua is saying wherever 2 or more are in agreement on a matter, that I will be in their midst, which is just a little twist from the rabbinic teaching that Adonai will be present. In other words, God and Yeshua is saying, I am going to ratify your decision because you're making it on my behalf. So what a tremendous responsibility. If even in a congregation or in the community of Messiah, if you happen to be in a position of judging, judging a person's situation or their actions, we're to be representing Adonai. What an awesome responsibility. Now then, in verse 7, now then, let the fear of Adonai be upon you. Be very careful what you do, and there is no injustice or favoritism or bribe taking with Adonai Eloheinu, with the Lord God, with the Lord our God. That's Yehoshaphat. That's the heart of Yehoshaphat as he is establishing judges within the southern tribes of Judah. Now, also in the same chapter 19, Yehoshaphat appoints what appears to be a kind of a Sanhedrin of judges. It doesn't tell us how many of them, but we do have some precedent even in the Torah in terms of the number of judges that may have been appointed here. He charged them, these judges in Jerusalem who are basically a high court within the land of Judah. He charged them saying, this is how you shall act in the fear of Adonai, faithfully and wholeheartedly. Oh, that our judges today. We talked about that, I heard some discussion about Roe v. Wade, and there were enough judges to take another look at Roe v. Wade. And by the way, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she had made the comment at one point that Roe v. Wade was kind of on shaky ground. She admitted that, although she probably would have voted against striking it down or overturning it. But I did want to say, in the spirit of our discussion today, because we're going to be talking about the importance of prayer as well, our prayers need to continue, because that's just one step in the process. It's an important step because it drives everything back to the state level in terms of determining, whether abortions are allowed or not. But the states still have that power. And so really, what's the biggest need? The biggest need is changed hearts within our nation. And that's ultimately what we're praying for. We're praying that God would change the hearts of people within our country, so that at least a strong majority of people would come against abortion. And so anyway, our prayers need to continue, and they need to continue for the people within our nation. We don't want this just to be a kind of a ping pong match, in the courts. So he charged them saying, this is how you shall act in the fear of Adonai, faithfully and wholeheartedly. When any dispute comes to you from the kinsmen who live in their cities, whether bloodshed or concerning Torah, mitzvot, statutes, or ordinances, you must warn them so that they will not be guilty before Adonai. Otherwise, wrath will come upon you and your kinsmen. Act accordingly, and you will not be guilty. Act courageously. And when judges are in a position of authority like this, courage is needed. Act courageously, and may Adonai be with the good. In other words, those who do well, those who act in accordance with these standards. Well, after all this, Yehoshaphat gets, he's been doing good things. He's brought the kingdom of Judah back to faith in Adonai, and he's appointed judges and has restored Judah to follow the Lord. And this, you would think that this is the life he should enjoy from this point forward. I happen to like this picture of a man on a hammock because he's also strumming a guitar. Excuse me. So, no, that's not me, by the way. Yeah, there's too much hair on his head. So, chapter 20, which just happens to follow chapter 19, Yehoshaphat will be faced with an enemy greater than he himself can handle alone. So 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Now it happened after this that the children of Moab and the children of the Ammonites and those with them, with the Ammonites, came to make war against Yehoshaphat. I had to look at that in the Hebrew, that first verse there, because the third party there was kind of ambiguous at this point. Later on, we see that there are people from Mount Seir, which are probably the Edomites as well, who joined them. So there were three nations that were coming against Judah at this time. They came to make war against Yehoshaphat. And in many cases, the target is the temple in Jerusalem. Then some came and reported to Yehoshaphat, saying, a great multitude is coming against you from beyond the sea, from Aram, and are already in Hazazon Tamar, that is En-Gedi. So the location that they were at, they were very close to Jerusalem, but they were down by the Red Sea, because En-Gedi, it goes all the way down to the valley there. And so Jerusalem is higher up, and they could look down and they could see these armies that were assembling and that were ready to ascend and attack Jerusalem. Yehoshaphat was afraid so he resolved to seek Adonai. That should always be our instinct. When we fear, our instinct should be to seek Adonai. And he proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. Judah assembled to seek help from Adonai. Indeed, they came from all the cities of Judah to seek the Lord, to seek Adonai. And, God's timing is perfect, of course. The faith had been restored throughout Judah, and now all of Judah comes to Jerusalem to seek the Lord along with Yehoshaphat. Then Yehoshaphat stood in the congregation of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Adonai in front of the new courtyard and said, Adonai, this is a wonderful prayer here. Adonai, God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can stand against you. Are you not our God who drove out the inhabitants of the land before your people Israel and gave it to the descendants of your friend Abraham forever? Now, he's referencing Abraham, but he's really referencing Joshua as he took Israel into the land, and they were able to inhabit the land miraculously. So they're remembering what God has already done and the greatness that he has shown on behalf of Israel. They settled in it, and they built you a temple there for your name, saying. And this is very important because now they're hearkening back to what was the dedication of the temple by Solomon, and part of what Solomon's prayer was for the temple. If calamity comes upon us, the sword of judgment, pestilence of famine, we will stand before the house and before you. Now, what is it referring to when it says the house? Just a big house? It's the temple, Habayit. You know, I mean, that's mostly what the temple is referred to as. You know, we go to Acts chapter 2, where the Spirit fell upon the disciples, the followers of Yeshua, who were waiting in Jerusalem. It said that the mighty wind filled the house, and it wasn't the upper room where they were sleeping. This was at 9 o'clock in the morning when there were services at the temple. When it said the house, it referred to the temple, which is much more dramatic and miraculous than just, you know, filling an upper room. The temple was huge, and there were hundreds of thousands of people there who witnessed what was going on. But here it says, and keep in mind, Jehoshaphat is gathered in Jerusalem at the temple at this very moment as he prays with those from Judah. And he says, we stand before the house and before you. For your name, the name of Adonai, is in this house. Your reputation is in this house. And we cry to you in our distress, and you will hear and deliver us. Now, what were they referring to here? In Solomon's prayer, just to kind of skip down, I'm going to skip the Daniel passage there for a moment. 1 Kings chapter 8, and you see several verses there. Solomon's prayer was that God would answer both Jewish and non-Jewish people when praying toward the temple. No matter where they were, whether they were close or whether they were in a distant land, that God would answer them as they honored God and prayed toward the house of God in Jerusalem, where the manifest presence of God was dwelling in Israel. And then we look at Daniel chapter 6, and it tells us that he had a window in his apartment that faced Jerusalem. And so 3 times a day, he would pray and he would praise the Lord while he was facing Jerusalem. And by the way, throughout history, including today, it's a tradition when praying, you know, whether in synagogue or outside of synagogue, to pray facing Jerusalem. Now, the remarkable thing, you know, we don't have a temple today, so why should we do that? Well, in Daniel's time, the temple was destroyed. And so he still remembered the prayer of Solomon and faced Jerusalem where the temple had once been standing. An interesting tradition. But what was the purpose of that? You know, God's name was attached to that temple, his name. You know, but today also we're to pray, you know, Yeshua instructed us to pray in his name as well. So in the case of Yeshua, we pray because he has merited our righteousness. And that's very powerful because we have favor before God because of what Yeshua has done for us. In verse 10, now behold, the sons of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, now it references Mount Seir, the Edomites, whose land you did not allow Israel to invade when they came out of the land of Egypt, Instead, they turned aside from them and did not destroy them. Now, behold, some 700 years later, maybe 800, what a memory they had, right? They said, we didn't destroy them because, well, they were relatives. They were relatives. Ammon and Moab, they were descendants of Lot. And Mount Seir, the Edomites, they were the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob. And so God told them, you don't destroy them. Just, pass by. If they help you, they help you. If they don't, they don't. But now they're saying, behold, in verse 11, now behold how they repay us by coming to drive us out of your possession that you gave us as an inheritance. Our God will you not execute judgment on them? For we have no power to face this great multitude that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. That's such an important part of the prayer here. We have no power in this case to face this enemy. We don't know what to do at this point. And certainly God has said, don't make alliances, with other countries. Put your trust in the Lord. Our eyes are on you. Exactly what we should be doing when we face trouble as well. In verse 13, all Judah was standing before Adonai with their infants, their wives, and their children. Then, in the midst of the congregation, the Ruach Adonai came upon Yahaziel, son of Zechariah, son of Benaiah, son of Yeiel, son of Mattaniah, the Levite, of the sons of Asaph. And he said, so the Spirit has come upon all of these prophets in this case, and they're uttering words from the Lord of encouragement and instruction to the people of Judah who are assembled there in Jerusalem. And said, listen, all Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem and King Jehoshaphat. Thus Adonai says to you, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed because of this great multitude. For the battle is not yours, but God's. Now, in this case, he's going to tell them, you're not going to be fighting the battle. God is going to be fighting on your behalf. He's going to be acting on your behalf. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes Israel was called to go into battle. In this case, God is saying, you're not going to be going out to fight in this case. But even when we go out into battle ourselves, no matter what God instructs us to do, ultimately, the battle is the Lord's. Especially when we're facing a situation that's greater than ourselves. If the battle is ours, it's all lost. If the battle is the Lord's, that's where there's victory. So, tomorrow, God does have some instructions for them, even though the battle is not theirs. Tomorrow, go down against them as they come up the ascent of Ziz. And remember, they're down in this valley, as low as some 1,200 feet below sea level. It's that whole area there is the lowest point on earth, actually. The valley. So come up from the ascent of Ziz. As they come up from the ascent of Ziz, you will find them at the end of the valley in front of the wilderness of Yeruel. You will not fight in this battle. Take your positions, stand and see the salvation of Adonai with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not be afraid or dismayed. Tomorrow go out and face them, for Adonai is with you. So they were called to do something here, and we're going to see that they went out, they didn't have weapons. What they did, though, was they had Levites going out in front of them leading in praises to God. That's how they went out to face the enemy. So no wonder God is saying, don't be afraid. I mean, from a strategic standpoint, we have every right to be afraid. God says, don't be afraid or dismayed. Tomorrow, go out and face them, face the enemy, for Adonai is with you. So this is, again, God is instructing them, put your faith into practice, emunah. Put your faith into practice and obey just this one command. Go out, but you're going to be led by the Levites who are singing praises before the Lord. Really remarkable. Jehoshaphat bowed down with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell down before Adonai to worship the Lord. Levites from the sons of Kohath and the sons of Korach stood to praise Adonai, God of Israel, with a very loud voice. Now, why did I put the word who there after Korach? Remember who Korach is? Korach he was a relative of Moshe, actually, but he led a rebellion, a major rebellion against Moses. And his end, you remember how things ended for him? Yeah, there was. I see somebody going like this, right? Yeah, the earth opened up, swallowed him and his family, and closed. But apparently not all of his family, because we see, in fact, when we look through the Psalms, we see written by the sons of Korach. In fact, Psalm 42, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants after you, O Lord. That was written by the sons of Korach. And so, we see God's grace there as well. Remarkable that it makes mention of them. They stood to praise God, the God of Israel, with a very loud voice. And early in the morning, they arose and they went out into the wilderness of Tekoa. As they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, "Listen to me, O Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in Adonai, your God, and you will be confirmed. Trust in his prophets." In other words, trust in the words that the prophets are speaking here, and you will succeed. In verse 21, after consulting with the people, he appointed singers to Adonai, praising the splendor of his holiness as they went out before the army, saying, "Give thanks to the Lord," to give thanks to Adonai, "for his loving kindness endures forever." That should sound a little bit familiar, right? Just a little bit. Although it's not as complete as how it's worded in some of the Psalms, but because it would say, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever." But here we have it for you Hebrew students, Hodu Adonai ki leolam chasdo. So part of it is missing there, but this is how they sung it at that time. Give thanks to the Lord, for his loving kindness endures forever. So likely they sang this responsively as they were going out. The Levites singing Hodu Adonai, and the army responding, Ki leolam chasdo, for his loving kindness endures forever. Excuse me. Praise is offered before the victory. They're singing these praises to the Lord, and the Lord hasn't acted on their behalf yet. They're just going out very vulnerable, but they're singing praises to the Lord. That's what God instructed, so that's what they're doing. They're showing their faith and their faithfulness to God, confronting the enemy. And Jehoshaphat and all Judah can now overcome any obstacles or challenges that they're going to face. Why? Because God has spoken, they're doing what he has instructed, and now they're waiting to see that the battle is not theirs, but it's the Lord's. As they began singing and praising praising, Adonai set ambushes against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come against Judah, and they were defeated. What kind of ambushes? For the Ammonites and the Moabites rose up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir to exterminate and annihilate them. Now we're down to 2 armies. And when they had exterminated the inhabitants of Seir, the help of every man was now against his companion for destruction. So in other words, they turned against each other, the 2 remaining armies, and they completely destroyed each other. God had brought confusion upon them so that they no longer were coming up to destroy Jerusalem, but now they destroyed themselves. You know, there's a story that I heard from a friend, and really a friend of a friend, so this was secondhand, but my friend told the story of his friend who was just beginning in one of the police forces within Orange County, and this was actually decades ago, and this friend of his was just starting out in the police department. He was a rookie. And so he was paired up with a more experienced partner, and they went out, and one day they pulled over a car which they suspected of drunk driving, and they pulled him over into a gas station. And when they looked in the car, they saw open cans, open bottles, and so they decided, well, we need to call for backup, and we're going to take. There were 6 men in this car, and so they took all the men out of the car. They happened to be big bikers that didn't look very friendly, and they were big. And so they got them out of the car, these 6 men, and all of a sudden the 6 men jumped them. And they wrestled them to the ground, and they started throwing punches, and it didn't look so good. And then one of the men, he said, get their guns, and we're gonna blow their brains out. Not a very comfortable situation at that point. But the holsters were designed in such a way that you couldn't just take it out anyway. You actually had to kind of move it forward and then lift it out, and they weren't doing this, so they weren't able to get the guns out. And then all of a sudden, the 2 police officers, they were able to get themselves up to their feet, and they realized that the 6 men were now fighting each other. And they beat up each other, and so backup came, and they arrested the 6, and everything was okay. And the younger police officer, the rookie, he asked his partner. He said, "Did they hit you at all? Were they, they were throwing these punches?" And he said, "No, not even once." And how about you? No, not even the punches landed. As they were trying to take the police officers out. So I love that story because it just reminds me so much of what happened here in chapter 20 in 2 Chronicles, that God brought them into confusion, and they started fighting each other, and they destroyed each other. And so the battle was the Lord's, not theirs. And thank God for those 2 policemen. When Judah came to the lookout in the wilderness and looked for the multitude, behold, only corpses were lying on the ground. No one had escaped. When Jehoshaphat and his people went to take the plunder, they found an abundance of goods, clothing and precious articles, which they stripped for themselves. They plundered it, more than they could carry away. For 3 days they were taking the plunder because there was so much. And on the 4th day, they assembled in the valley of Bracha. What does Bracha mean, you Hebrew students? It's a blessing. In the valley of Bracha, where they blessed Adonai. That is why the name of that place is called the Valley of Bracha to this very day. Then every man of Judah and Jerusalem, with Jehoshaphat at their head, returned joyfully to Jerusalem, for Adonai had given them cause to rejoice over their enemies. They came to Jerusalem, to the house of Adonai, with harps and with trumpets. So the fear of God was on all the kingdom of the region, because they heard that all the kingdoms surrounding Judah heard about this. They heard that Adonai had fought against the enemies of Israel. So the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was untroubled, for his God gave him rest all around. So here we see that when God brings these troubles upon us, it's not just to strengthen our faith, but it's also for the people around us to see God working in our lives. So, may our lives, be an example to our friends, our family, those who need to know him, coworkers, even those that don't like us. It's amazing. The people that don't like us, they watch us just as closely as our close friends and family. Jehoshaphat walked in the way of his father. We're skipping to verse 32 in chapter 20. He walked in the way of the father, his father Asa, who was also a good king, and did not stray from it, doing what was right in the eyes of Adonai. And yet, he continued these alliances with the kings of the north. Achab was now gone, but his descendants were assuming the throne in the northern kingdom. Why would he do that? And knowing Jehoshaphat's heart, is likely the answer to that is that he wanted Israel to be united. This was a judgment that Israel should be divided, the southern tribes of Judah and the northern tribes of Israel. He had a heart for peace. He had a heart for God, for all that God had for Israel. And it wasn't going to be seen as they were divided, such as they were. So he had the right heart, but he had to be more careful in those alliances, because they had consequences for his descendants and even for the people of Judah as well. Now, one of the closing questions here: how do we praise God now before he moves mountains on our behalf? How do we praise him? What's the nature of our praise before he acts on our behalf, when we're praying for deliverance, when we're praying for help? When we love God, we look for ways to praise him even before he acts. How do we do that? First of all, we praise him that he is the God and the king over all the earth. And we're following the example of Jehoshaphat and his prayer, but we see this in Psalm 47. We praise him, excuse me, we praise him that nothing is too difficult for God. We recognize that, and we also have to recognize that in certain situations that we are powerless to stand against our challenges. We praise him that in our difficult circumstances, God will have his way and will deliver us in whatever way he chooses. And God is very creative and often does things in a variety of ways when he delivers us and comes to our help. There's no formula for how we pray or how God responds. So we're not called to try to manipulate God. And that's what the nations around Israel would do. They would try to manipulate and gain favor with their gods. We don't manipulate God at all. It's not, if I do this, God is going to do that. There's no formula in that way. I love, just thinking about some examples of how Yeshua responded and helped people and healed people in a variety of ways. Just to give you a couple examples here. When a daughter of the Canaanites came, she was a Gentile, and her daughter was suffering terribly from demonization. Well, what did Yeshua do? He just spoke the word. So he spoke, as he can do. He spoke the word, and the daughter was delivered from that demonization. Yeshua healed the lepers in the same way. He simply spoke the word. How did he heal the blind? Did he just speak the word? In that case, no. In one case, he spit on the ground, made some mud, and then applied it to the eyes. And the person was healed. Another time, it says he just spit in the eyes. And in that case, he spit in the eyes and he said, "What do you see?" And the man only saw blur, everything was blurry for him. So he did it again, a second time. And you have to ask the question, why did it take 2 times? He had his reasons. We could go into that another time. But the point being that Yeshua he never did things in just one way. In Israel's history of battles, Yehoshaphat, he didn't have to go and fight, but they did have to face the enemy. At the Red Sea, when Moses, he was leading 3 million people out of Egypt, and he had the Egyptian army on one side, the Red Sea on the other, and the Lord said, "No, you're not going to have to battle. Just start walking through the sea." Against the Moabites, this was later in the 40 years in the wilderness. Israel went out against the Moabites and the Midianites, and they fought. God told them to fight with only 12,000 men, 1,000 from each of the tribes. And not the officers came back after the battle and said not even one person was lost in that battle, even though they faced an enemy that was far, far greater and of greater number. Other battles that are described in Scripture, men were lost, and they did have to go out into battle. They did have to fight many times. So God delivers us in many different ways. It's up to Him. Our prayer is to we pray to Him and we praise Him for who He is and that He's able to deliver us. So, first of all, acknowledge that we are no match for our enemy. We go back to the AA, right? The first step. We're no match for our enemy, and we all come to that point sometime in our life. Sometimes we come to that point many times in our lives. Recognize that God is ready to receive us when we come to Him in humility and according to His terms. Praise Him for His ability to deliver us from any circumstance that we face. And praise Him that He loves us enough to want to save us, to want to help us, to want to deliver us. God does want to deliver us because He does love us. He loved us enough that He sent Yeshua to us. And with Adonai, we can overcome any obstacles and challenges in our lives, especially when we pray in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. And only then are we making the love and the power of God our strength. Amen? Baruch Hashem. That was very weak. Baruch Hashem. All right, let's stand together. Now to Him who is able to immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us, to Him be glory in Messiah Yeshua. Teach us how to praise You even before You have answered us, knowing that nothing is too great for You, the Lord and King over all the world, over all the nations. O Lord, many are our foes, many who rise up against me. But you are a shield for me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I will not be afraid of 10,000 all around who take their stand against me. Arise, Adonai, and deliver us, and let your blessings be upon your people, B'Shem Yeshua. V'imru, and let us say, Amen. Amen. All right.